Do you know the virginity rate among men in Japan? According to more recent national surveys and academic estimates, among men aged 30 to 34 across Japan, roughly 10% to 13% still report having had no sexual experience at all, a level that has remained persistently high into the early 2020s. What does 10 to 13% actually mean? At first glance, it may not sound that dramatic, but just compare it with the data from 1987. Back then, the rate was only about 8.8%. In other words, over the past few decades, there has been an increase of roughly 4 to 5 percentage points. That is a significant rise. After all, in the United Kingdom and the United States, the proportion of virgins in the same age group usually stays between 1.5% and 3%, nowhere near Japan's level. This somewhat awkward statistic even seems to clash with Japan's image as a country with a highly developed adult entertainment industry. This suggests that Japan is entering an era of sexual recession. More and more young Japanese people stop dating, stop getting married, don't build families, and simply begin living without desire, without relationships, without ambition. So what is really happening to Japanese men who lie down and give up? Have they reached some kind of spiritual enlightenment? Or have they simply surrendered? Reaching one's 30s while remaining a virgin, for most young Japanese men, does not represent higher virtue or monk-like detachment from the world. In reality, it reflects a forced choice under multiple pressures, an involuntary suppression of basic human desires. In simple terms, they were pushed into it. The image of the herbivore man, created by Japanese writer Moki Fukasawa, has become one of the defining characteristics of men in today's Japan. Unlike the traditional carnivore man, strong, dominant, and proactive in pursuing women, the herbivore man is more reserved and restrained, highly passive in relationships, and tends to comply with women's expectations while avoiding any behavior seen as out of line. For a period, these gentlemen actually became quite popular among Japanese women and were even considered ideal dating partners. As a result, in a country that already had few romantic relationships, a role reversal emerged. Women began taking the initiative, while men, shy and timid, simply accepted passively. Of course, the herbivore men who truly received female attention were always a minority. Most men, those without striking looks and who make little effort to improve themselves, end up eliminated in this social selection. What remains is loneliness and a road with no visible end. These discarded men also have no intention of taking initiative. Instead, they transfer their emotions and mental energy to female anime characters. It seems that only in virtual worlds can they temporarily escape the pressures of real life, open their hearts, and face someone who does not care about any of their flaws. Not dating and not marrying has already become common in Japan. Not striving and not progressing have also found fertile ground there. Japan's suicide rate has remained high for many years, closely linked to the cold and unforgiving work environment. Experience, income, and status directly determine how people around you treat you. If you fail at work, you will likely be seen as a loser, enduring both psychological and emotional pressure in an environment lacking empathy. As a result, many young Japanese simply quit their jobs. They realize that no matter how hard they run, they never see the finish line. This should serve as an alarm bell for Japanese society. Lying flat is not something beautiful, and a mentality that abandons progress clearly does not deserve encouragement. What exactly did these young people go through to become passive, herbivorous men who close off hearts that still long to be cared for? In an economically advanced society, why did the youth of the Heisei era, often labeled the decadent generation, choose to give up? And how can this Japanese low-desire society, now approaching a pathological state, possibly save itself? What does this low-desire society look like? Basically, rising virginity rates, young people who don't date, don't marry, don't have children, live without desire, lying flat in inertia. This already goes against basic human nature. Is there anything more unmotivated than that? So what exactly happened to Japanese youth? Why, in a country with more women than men, did such a large group of complacent male singles emerge? 3 main factors explain this situation. First, brutal social competition. If you can't win, you lie down. Most single men of marriage age grew up after Japan's economic bubble burst in the 1990s. Their childhoods were shaped by recessions and crises, facing from an early age the so-called lost decades. When they finally reached adulthood and entered the workforce, they ran straight into the Heisei era, marked by extreme competition, low wages, limited promotion opportunities, and rigid social stratification. Gradually, This generation lost its desire to fight. They no longer want to earn money, let alone date or marry. Already around 2000, surveys showed that only about 38% of Japanese men expressed interest in marriage, compared with roughly 54% of women. Attraction to the opposite sex and the drive to pursue relationships are written into human DNA. Yet Japanese men suppressed it by force. They went against their own nature, choosing to live alone into old age. One can only imagine how fierce social competition must be. The second factor comes from economic polarization. Japanese writer Atsushi Miura described a special group called the low-income society. Its defining traits are not just low wages, but also a broad decline in communication ability, independent living skills, willingness to work, learn, and consume, along with a near-total loss of enthusiasm for life. Many prefer not to become pillars of career or family, calmly accepting their place in this social layer. While a small elite of IT professionals and business leaders enjoy sophisticated urban lifestyles, a rapidly growing low-income group emerges, similar to those who spend their time reading cheap magazines in convenience stores. Here, low income does not mean extreme poverty, but rather the lower tier of the middle class. They manage to survive, but have completely lost motivation to grow materially or spiritually. Modern Japan increasingly resembles this society. More and more people are entering this group. Their desire for material goods and upward mobility has dropped sharply compared with previous generations. They have become a generation that lost both consumption drive and success ambition. At the same time, the rise of otaku culture and the spread of Western individualism have further reduced interest in effort and marriage. Many young people believe that if they can live more comfortably and express their individuality at lower cost, then why not? Finally, there is the long and excessive feminist movement in Japan. Throughout Japanese history, women occupied an inferior position, seen mainly as housewives and virtuous mothers, subordinate to men. Only from the 1960s onward, when Japan began emerging from the shadow of World War II, did women's status improve, alongside economic growth and under the influence of Western ideas of female independence. During this period, Japan's gender equality movement advanced rapidly. By the mid-1980s, women's social status had already improved significantly compared with the past. At first, Japanese feminism achieved remarkable results. It not only secured legitimate rights and freedoms for women at home, but also set a reference point for feminist movements worldwide. But when something goes too far, it often reverses direction. Japanese feminism gradually shifted toward radicalism, until it was eventually counterattacked by men themselves. So what happened? By the late 1980s, Japan's bubble economy had reached its peak. Japanese women had effectively become central figures in society. Rising female status and growing purchasing power opened the door for massive capital inflows into the female market. Distorted, highly materialistic values were continuously pushed onto women, encouraging financial extraction from men. As a result, many women were effectively reprogrammed. In the mindset of that era, winning a woman's heart required flowers, expensive gifts, jewelry, and luxury goods as mandatory tokens of romance. Sweet talk and one-sided emotional labor also became essential. This dating capitalism nearly eliminated relationship opportunities for men with weaker financial conditions. And even before the economic bubble burst, this unhealthy trend intensified further. Under the influence of radical feminist narratives, men were increasingly portrayed as dirty, evil, and eternally unworthy of standing on equal footing with women. According to this discourse, only by rejecting marriage and distancing themselves from men could women achieve true emancipation. From that point on, the so-called gender equality movement in Japan gradually turned into a trigger for conflict between the sexes, deepening social divisions. Women began to take pride in rejecting men, while men stopped trying to please women. Genders that should have complemented each other became opposing camps of resentment and attack. This unhealthy movement was destined to become a zero-sum game. In the end, Japan's once vibrant feminist movement was countered by men who chose to lie flat and give up. Women, pressured by social competition, slowly drifted back toward traditional roles. Meanwhile, men retained a mindset shaped by rejection and lost interest in pursuing love. After all the turbulence, both sides lost. What else can be said? When it comes to lying flat, no one goes further than Japan's young single men who fully embraced it. Raised in the post-bubble era, these young people gradually became insecure, timid, and emotionally closed under fierce competition. They grew not only numb to relationships, but fearful of intimacy itself, managing to carry virgin status into their 30s, day after day, inside a low-desire society. Today, low desire among Japanese youth has moved beyond gender and become a generalized social phenomenon. It is clear, Japan has fallen into a low-desire society and has developed countless variations of lying flat. You've probably heard of people who spend their entire paycheck every month, or young adults supported by their parents. But have you heard of freeters and social recluses? These groups, represented by freeters and recluses, have continued to grow in recent years. They are almost devotees of lying flat, widely seen as byproducts of Japan's low-desire society. Let's start with freeters. These are people without stable salaries who survive by jumping between short-term jobs. This group has accompanied Japan's economic development for decades. They already existed in the 1980s, and by around 2020 their number had reached roughly 1.3 million, remaining at similar levels in the early 2020s. Do they want to live this way forever? Of course not. They don't want to simply collapse into bed and abandon everything. They still try to support themselves. But the endless cycle of employment and unemployment exhausts them. In a highly competitive society with rising job insecurity, freeters largely represent the powerless psychological state of Japan's youth. It can be said that most Japanese who have now completely given up once displayed freeter-like traits at some point. If freeters are those still struggling inside the swamp of low desire, then social recluses are the classic example of people who stopped struggling and sank completely. Japanese recluses avoid school and work, cut off almost all human contact, and retreat into their rooms like hermit crabs hiding inside shells. They slowly sink into a world where day and night lose meaning. With no income at all, they depend entirely on their parents. In this sense, recluses represent the final form of the dependent child. For them, living off family becomes a natural part of existence. Without unconditional parental support, they would be like fish out of water, drifting toward an inevitable end. Recent government estimates suggest that the number of social recluses now approaches 1 to 1.5 million, spread across both younger and middle-aged groups, becoming a serious obstacle to Japan's economic and social development. They have taken wanting nothing to the extreme. No dating, no marriage, no children, no desire, lying flat in inertia. So what happened to Japanese men? How did a people who once fought tooth and nail to build their future become a punchline, labeled the failures of the Heisei era? Can Japanese men, now sunk into apathy, still recover their strength? In reality, this silent attitude toward life did not emerge overnight. It is the product of decades of social change, economic conditions, cultural context, and external influences combined. In the 1990s, the collapse of the economic bubble pushed Japan into more than 20 years of stagnation. Those born around this time grew up under immense academic and career pressure, while also facing rising living costs and the spread of consumerism. Simply surviving became difficult. Where would anyone find the energy to talk about love or starting a family? On top of that, the cost of dating also exploded under capital speculation. You reach into your pocket and realize you don't even have enough money to make a girl lift her head and look at you. Desire for love and insecurity about one's own status intertwine in the minds of young Japanese people. They grope through a society dominated by materialism, crashing into disappointment again and again. Disillusioned, many eventually choose to desire nothing at all. It is genuinely tragic. The collapse of desire creates a domino effect. Low dating rates lead to low marriage rates. Low marriage rates lead to population decline. Population decline accelerates aging, which then eliminates new consumer demand, leaving only the option of extracting value from those who have already given up. In this way, society enters a vicious cycle with no clear exit. These lying flat groups have become the hidden decay beneath Japan's polished surface. They have lost interest in life's goals, confining their personal worlds to small corners, abandoning the vitality that should define youth. They have turned resignation into capital for surviving the rest of their lives. How can this Japanese low-desire society, now bordering on pathology, possibly save itself? And can Japanese men still rise again, shed the label of a decadent generation, and create a better future for themselves and their country? That, no one knows yet.
If Japan has become the most uncomfortable mirror of our time, then the real question isn't, why are they like this? The real question is, why is this starting to feel normal? Because, deep down, what we saw in this story isn't really about virginity. Virginity is just the thermometer. What lies underneath is a society where the cost of living has risen, the The risk of failure has become a sentence, and the future has turned too abstract to serve as motivation. So the youth do what any human being does when they realize they can't win the game. They stop playing. And Japan is where this showed up first, most clearly as an open-air social laboratory. And I know this topic hits a nerve, because there's always someone trying to reduce everything to a caricature. It's laziness, it's cowardice, it's lack of masculinity, it's feminism, it's capitalism, it's porn, it's otaku culture. And that's it. Every group picks a favorite villain, throws it into the fire, and goes to sleep with a clean conscience. But real life doesn't work like that. What's happening there is the result of accumulated pressures, incentives, and consequences that created an entire generation with the feeling that relationships have become a high-risk, low-return investment. When a man feels he can't compete, he doesn't enter the ring, he withdraws, and when that becomes the norm, it's no longer an individual choice, it's a social symptom. Now let's talk about the part most people hate to hear. No one comes out clean in this story. Not men, not women, not government, not the market, not culture. Because what's been built over decades is a friction machine, a machine that turns everything into cost. Emotional cost, financial cost, social cost, reputational cost. And when everything becomes cost, saying yes becomes too expensive, saying no becomes the logical path. That's how the so-called low-desire society is born. Less dating, less marriage, fewer children, less sex, fewer attempts, less initiative. A world where people didn't become enlightened, they just got tired. And here's my opinion straight up, I don't buy this romanticized narrative of lying flat as if it were wisdom. It may be an understandable psychological defense, but it's not virtue, it's anesthesia. It's the modern version of surviving without living. At the same time, you also can't treat these men like cartoon villains. Because in many cases, they weren't spoiled. They were trained by reality to learn that effort doesn't guarantee results, that failure is expensive, that trying is humiliating, and that society only applauds you after you've already won. So they learn to do the minimum exposure, minimum risk, minimum expectations. And that doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes from decades of stagnation, insecurity, and a culture of constant pressure. At the same time, I also reject the idea that the solution is simply returning to traditional roles, like it's a magic button. That's intellectual laziness. You don't fix a complex society with nostalgia. What needs to change are the incentives, how people meet, how they build trust, how they deal with frustration, how they see commitment, how they face the future. Because without a future, nobody builds anything. Life turns into an endless present of consumption, distraction, and isolation. And that is literally the recipe for decline. And the most dangerous part, in my view, is this. When an entire generation gives up, the problem stops being individual and becomes structural. The collapse of desire turns into a domino effect. Fewer relationships, fewer marriages, fewer children, an aging population, less economic dynamism, less hope, more loneliness, more escapism. Then society tries to plug the hole with band-aids, entertainment, consumption, virtualization, escape. But that doesn't fix the root, it just makes the fall quieter. So here's the question I'm leaving with you. Is this progress, or is it a slow collapse with a beautiful soundtrack? Because a lot of things today look like freedom, but are really just well-packaged resignation. I don't need anyone can be strength, or it can be fear of needing someone and getting hurt. I chose to be alone can be a choice, or it can be adaptation to what became unreachable. And I'm not saying every single person is a failure, far from it. The problem is when solitude stops being an option and becomes a destination. When isolation becomes a social pattern, when apathy becomes identity. And if Japan is the laboratory, the rest of the world is watching, curious, while walking in the same direction. Because the erosion of desire doesn't happen only in Japan. It happens wherever life becomes too heavy, wherever the future feels closed, wherever relationships turn into wars of expectations, wherever trust disappears, wherever everyone enters guarded and leaves more cynical, and then lying flat stops being a meme and becomes a way of life. Now, I want you to answer in the comments honestly. In your view, what weighs most in this phenomenon? The economy, culture, social pressure, relations between men and women, the rise of virtual life, or a mix of all of it? And most importantly, do you think this can be reversed? Or will the world simply learn to live with an increasingly lonely generation? If you liked the video, leave a like, Subscribe to the channel for more content like this, turn on notifications, and share it with someone who needs to hear this discussion. I'll see you in the next video.